Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, to be on the podcast. Like we were just talking about, it was a complete shot in the dark. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and I shot this one and it landed. So it's a pleasure to have you on, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
You are the first veteran to be on the podcast, and I'll tell a little story about why to me that's meaningful, and I'm sure to the viewers as well. But I was in Egypt when I turned 21, and that was an insane experience. Just being, I'd never been in a country like that in my life, and being in a zone where like you have really, really wealthy next to extreme poverty, and seeing that kind of juxtaposition was just very impactful for me. And I turned 21. I was in the Minneapolis airport getting my first legal drink in the United States at the Rock Bottom Bar in the airport. And this guy sat next to me, and he was, I think he was active duty. And I just looked at him and I was like, thank you so much. And I didn't know how to explain why, but having just seen the difference of where I am able to grow up and what I experience on a day-to-day basis and what I was exposed to there, that was that first really kind of like wow experience. And so yet again, I mean, thank you so much for your service, for everything that you guys do. What is it like for you to be here, not in combat anymore? And do you feel any of that gratitude ever?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of gratitude. I think back when I was deploying, every time coming back to the States, it's like coming into a different universe. Just going home, your eyes hurt from seeing green again versus just desert everywhere. But yeah, it can be pretty paradigm shifting, seeing some of like the abject poverty and everything that creates insurgencies and everything overseas. So yeah, I'm always grateful to be in America, particularly North Carolina. I love this state. Never want to leave. I was stationed here, and yeah, just having the ability to take my family out without worrying about anything is pretty fantastic.
What was it that drew you to? I guess this should be a worthy part of the podcast too. Is kind of explaining who you are. I typically don't do backgrounds with people, but yours is so extensive. Maybe kind of run through how you ended up where you are today, a little bit about yourself, and what led you to enlist and serve in the first place.
I was kind of really enthralled with the military when I was in high school. I didn't have a lot of family members, and I think my grandfather was in the army for a bit, and that was about it. I was just kind of enthralled with it. Loved everything about like special operations community. I was just fascinated. So high school, I was always like sitting in the back of the class, like a paper book about Vietnam, not paying attention, and my grades reflected that. So the only school I applied to was West Point, and I was bottom 50% of my high school class. They were like, kindly move along. I enlisted like June 2001. So September 11th happened when I was right at the end of my my infantry like job qualification training. So I went to an Army Ranger Battalion, did Afghanistan 02, invasion of Iraq 03, and then got into the West Point prep school. So I went there for a year, then did 4 years at West Point as a prior service cadet. Came out, went infantry again, was in 82nd Airborne as a platoon leader, did a year-long trip to Afghanistan, and then applied for the Special Forces pipeline. So I got into that, and that's a couple of years of training. Got to 3rd Special Forces Group here at Fort Bragg, and I did 3 trips to them, 2 Afghanistan, 1 Africa, and then by then it was my high water mark. Being a team leader in SF is like the greatest thing I could ever hope to do, and I had like the perfect cast of characters on my team, and I could not have had any greater of a time. So I knew I wanted to get out after that. I would have just been chasing, that experience for another 10 years or so. And by then I'd been a closet writer for like a decade. So a few years prior to getting out, I just said, I'm just going to jump in, self-publish a book, and then kind of go from there, use my real name, real picture, like no pen names, and just burn every bridge so I couldn't just back out of it quietly and, get a real job. So that's what I did about 4 years ago.
Wow. I mean, too much to unpack there even. If we venture back to the beginning, so you were already enlisted. September 11th happened and you were already well on your way to serve.
Yeah.
What was that like?
So interestingly enough, we were on a field exercise at the time, and so all the basic trainees, you're out in these tents in the field, and then there's a cadre like building where all the drill sergeants stayed. And then one morning, they just didn't come out. Like nobody ever came to get us and tell us to fall in. And an hour or so later, they came out and asked, who's got family in New York, and there were a few people, and then they were like, who's got family at work in the World Trade Center. And there was one kid, and they pulled him aside and then told us that one of the towers had been hit, and then another tower had been hit, and then they came back out where like Pentagon got hit, like we're under attack. And then, everybody pretty much sat down. We obviously did not train that day, so we were kind of huddled up with our friends, and all my buddies, we all had Ranger contracts. You get out of basic training, you go to Airborne school, and then you go to a Ranger selection course, basically, try to get into a Ranger battalion.
And just sorry to interrupt here, but just like to go super layman's terms on this stuff. So that airborne training is to train to be an airborne infantry where you're actually out of the plane, right? That's like how you deploy. The planes. Okay, got you.
And then there's an additional selection course for the Rangers. So I was a student of special operations history. I knew more about that than what I was supposed to learn about in high school. And I was actually telling my friends, like, we need to drop out of our Ranger contracts and just get to a unit.
Why?
Because because wars didn't last long, right? You had Grenada 83, few days, Panama 89, 2 weeks, Mogadishu 93, which was one company of Rangers and then some JSOC types. And then, Gulf War 91, limited amount of ground combat, very limited engagement. And I was like, we got to get in the fight before this is over, because this might be our only chance. Like, America's not getting into another Vietnam. It's my quote. It's my genius. And fortunately, one of the
behold.
Who knew?
Yeah.
And we didn't, we stayed actually longer in Afghanistan. So one of the guys in my group of buddies, the UVA grad, had studied Afghanistan a lot. And he was the first one who said immediately, he's like, this is either state sponsored or terrorist sponsored by Afghanistan. It's time. We were like, oh, what's in Afghanistan? So he not only turned out to be right, obviously, but then he was the one who told me that morning, he's like, look, like, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be Afghanistan. It is not going to be quick. Like, we are going to be there a long time. He's like, nobody gets in and out of that country quickly. So pretty prophetic words on his part. And then, after that, everybody's pretty much like, we're going to war.
So I think of these situations as like, you get involved in this and ultimately, I would assume your goal is you want to defend your country, and that the most clear-cut expression of that would be to be in battle, right? You actually get the call. This is going to happen. It's real. Now you're going. Is there any shift psychologically that happened at that point? Are there like any amount of fear that comes with that? Or was it kind of like, just pull your bootstraps and let's go?
I wasn't really like scared to go to combat. And I don't say that like I'm awesome. Like, I've been absolutely terrified in training situations. And then recreational stuff, like, I'm scared of heights. Like, I got into base jumping and it was murderously terrifying for me. Actual combat, for whatever reason, I'm generally like really calm, like very focused. Whereas, stuff that's not combat, I can be absolutely horrified. So I wasn't really like scared to go to war. It was kind of like human carnage aside that led up to it. Like, it's kind of like winning the lottery, because you're being trained, basic training, Ranger selection, Airborne school, all that. You're being trained by guys who've been in the Army 10, 12 years, and haven't ever gone to combat. So we were like, it was kind of like we were the first generation. We were like, we're getting in a fight. It's going to be awesome.
And at that point, how much camaraderie have you built with the team that you would then deploy with?
It's tremendous. You get into like a really tight knit group, and there's guys that you fall out of touch with for 10, 15 years, and then they hit you up, and yeah, it's like you never split up in the first place. And that's one of the benefits of being in the Army is people of all socioeconomic classes, races, backgrounds, every type of life story you can imagine. And that's one of the things, like I don't get swept away with all the media like divisiveness and hatred and everything out there, because it didn't really exist in my experience with all the guys I served with. And that was my entire professional career up until a few years ago.
In the book, and we'll get to the book, that this comes through a lot, and I think one of the reasons I couldn't put it down was it was a very interesting, like these characters that you put in there, and I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who's going to read it, so I won't go too much into it, but there's this very evident real, and I think that's the key part, is it feels very real, like you're almost in a room of other friends of yours, and you understand like just the way that they talk to each other, and then their ability to flip the switch and be very engaged in what's going on, and then bounce back out of that and kind of throw some humor at each other despite being in this bullets flying over their head. And it just hit me as like had a really good way of bringing this real account of what I can imagine are some relationships that you had with people that were on your team, and maybe conversations that you actually like had going on come through these characters in the book. And it's juxtaposed against a war zone, which from someone who's never been in the military, hasn't, I do jujitsu and Muay Thai recreationally, but like that's the extent of any kind of combat that I've ever experienced in my life, ever. So to have these humorous storylines that are going through between the characters, it was like a breath of fresh air in this genre. And it made me think a lot and want to know about those people that you're with. I mean, you have to trust them, like probably some degree of trust that I just won't ever understand, right? When you're over there.
Yeah, it becomes pretty tight knit. That's actually one of my favorite things to write is the banter, and it's one of the things I'm most often complimented on. I hear from a lot of like former military, current or former law enforcement that are like, this brought me back to like the terrible commanders trying to micromanage and like being with the guys, shit talking. And that's something I really enjoy like representing, because none of the things I write about are real. Like everybody thinks I'm writing like about actual missions. I'm not at all. But I do like to reflect that authenticity and like the banter and shit talking among guys that are like so tight that they can't like offend each other.
Right.
It's a blast. It's one of the best parts of my job.
Yeah, that reading it, I could imagine that there's no way, snowball's chance in hell that you're writing about anything that actually happened. Just from a securities standpoint, I would imagine you can't do that. But just with like Ian kind of getting shit on by the other characters, yet he's like this linchpin in their ability to operate. So it's a level of respect, and I can almost, you feel that within your own friend group, just in the world, that you give each other shit and you trash talk each other, but you also recognize how valuable you are to each other, how much the camaraderie of your friendships, your brotherhood, it all matters. But you can still have these kind of funny conversations. It makes the book really fun to read. And then you drop in like very specific, what seems to me like tactical views into how you guys do things. Like it's not just written as a James Bond kind of like the best case scenario is always going on, but even the way that you talk about very specific things, the way that they move was one thing that stuck out to me a lot. It's how you talk about their movement as a team and putting the hand on the shoulders and like these very little things that I had no exposure to this. So it kind of pulls you into the hallway that they're in, and you're like, holy shit, like this is really real, despite it being a fictional story. What is it when you're deployed? So when you're over there, you said you were Afghanistan and Iraq, like back to back, right? So it's 02, 03.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I got the cities wrong, but are you on, like you're out there, you're running similar missions tactically like what you write about, just not those type of things?
Yeah, sort of similar. So in, Rangers, they're elite infantry. But yeah, Afghanistan, we were launching, they'd seized Bagram, obviously well before I got there in like mid '02. So we were basically running out of the airfield, and would launch on helos or whatever. And then we would deploy to a forward base out east, and run stuff a little closer to the border. But yeah, you're kind of out on mission, then you come back to the base. And then Iraq was just the first 30 days were like living out of a rucksack. Like there were no bases. Like we seized a desert landing strip to start running aircraft. Another company seized an airfield, and then we flipped there, and you're just doing big expeditionary movements. Like we ran like a convoy of trucks, and I remember one night it was like we just came over a ridge, and 300 meters away there's like an Iraqi anti-aircraft gunner just shooting up, blindly. We'd engage, like you just call in an airstrike because at that time there's like tank convoys and stuff running
Right.
around, like Iraqi tank convoys. So we were just trying to get where we were going. But yeah, the invasion was a real cool ride. But it was the field the whole time, or living in a hole in the ground, or living on the trucks, for the most part, or recently seized building. And then, as Afghanistan progressed, boy, 82nd Airborne, they were like, hey, take your platoon. You're going to set up shop here in an Afghan district center. Come up with a defensive plan. This is the area base the Afghans are giving you. Figure it out, and you're going to start running ops with them. Down to like, hey, this district does not have any Americans, and you're going to drive, 6 hours there and go set up shop the same way with people you've never worked with before. So there was a lot of autonomy. In the infantry by then. It was kind of a chess game of trying to seize districts, and then you would do that and try not to get anybody killed and have all the gunfights and IEDs. And then the next unit to come through at the end of that year-long rotation and be like, yeah, we're not going to do anything in this district, so pack it up. Like, okay, great. That would
Jeez.
have been really useful information to have, a few months ago before a bunch of people almost died. And then my last trip to Afghanistan was 2015, with Special Forces. And it was a very small, pretty much just special operations presence on a base that was largely Afghan owned. And we would, you'd have your 10-man team, and you'd get with 80 or 90 Afghan commandos, and take helicopters or take trucks and just go out to the shittiest areas and pick a fight and stay there 36, 48 hours. That was kind of the end of any combat I was involved in. And it was the beginning of the end, even in Afghanistan. My team was really lucky. Other teams went to districts or provinces where, they would hit the ground, and the Taliban would be like, oh, cool, we're gonna wait you out. I know you're gonna be leaving here soon. And then as soon as the Americans left, they'd come back in. Where we were at, Logar and Wardak, they would run to their deaths. Everybody
Really?
everybody with a gun would grab it and come running. So it was it was a really fun ride. But for the most part, like, the Taliban was just starting to transition to like, we're going to wait you out in most parts of the country, because
Is
they knew what was up.
is it tough, given like U.S. intelligence and how much we know that our soldiers, yourself included, are prepared, and how much training you do? Is it hard to bridge that gap when you have to work with like coalition forces and trust them on their local intelligence? Like, what's that like, building those relationships to take your skill set, couple that with what they know, and then operate together?
So the main thing is just establishing legitimacy with the host nation force. We had to do it like Army Special Force at the Green Berets. That's their bread and butter. They send in a team that is trained and equipped to basically partner with up to a battalion-sized force and help get all their infrastructure in place, their equipment. You start training them, and then you take them out on missions. So it's kind of like, as my old team sergeant would put it, it's like being a drill sergeant that takes the privates into combat. But I also did it. That was what I did in 82nd Airborne. Like, that's what they tasked us to do. You're going to partner with the Afghan army or the Afghan police in these areas. So the biggest thing is like establishing legitimacy with them, that you're competent, you have their best interests at heart. You're not going to be hunkered down in the base, like you guys are you're gonna eat together, you're gonna operate together. And then once, they begin to trust you professionally, and then the rapport is a really big part of it. Like I had a Afghan police commander, and if, this is when I was an infantry PL, like I was a second lieutenant in my 20s. And there were times he wanted a quick meeting and then get the fuck out of my office. I have stuff to do. And there were times where he wanted to smoke cigarettes and watch Bollywood TV for 5 hours and talk about the women in India. It's like, that's what we'll do. But once you get those relationships, it becomes very much a partnership. And I was that was 2009, 2010. So that was before there was a lot of green on blue engagements where the Afghans would just, there'd be embedded Taliban or sympathizers who would just gun down a bunch of Americans. So that became very prevalent shortly after that. So my 2015 trip, that's a big consideration. And, you have to take precautions against it. So, we had ways of doing it, like trying to be low key. The intelligence is obviously a big part. And then having like, hey, if we go down there for an administrative meeting, this many people are going to have long guns, everybody's going to have a pistol. And then you do a lot of training where, if you have a shoot house for the day or for the week for training, you spend some time doing unilateral room clearing, make sure everybody's going to go with it.
What does that mean?
Oh, like just Americans are going to go clear the building, right?
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying. Unilateral from like the forces perspective.
Yes, which is necessary because, one, you could end up doing it, but most likely when you're partnering with the host nation forces, you're going to be doing it with the Afghans, very spread out. Mm-hmm. So you practice that for a little bit, and then you turn it into like, okay, this is a KLE gone bad, like a key leader engagement or a meeting gone bad. So you start in a room, everybody's sitting down with concealed pistols. Somebody says go, and then you basically clear your way out and shoot your way out of the shoot house. Like we would do, training like that, prepare as best we could. But yeah, I mean, those attacks, they were successful very often. That's a tough situation.
So they would set up like some sort of meeting where from our side, it looks like you're going in to establish rapport, build relationships, get intel in the local area. But really, it's a trap to lure as many Americans into this situation, and then the tides turn, essentially.
So we would prepare for that because you're always doing meetings where you have a few Americans in the room, in a Afghan-owned area, or you're meeting with people in a village. Most of the green on blue attacks that I heard of were typically like it's a normal day of training, or you're getting ready to go on a mission, and then one dude or two dudes or three dudes just open up on all the Americans and or British, as the case may be, and then try to take as many out as they can before they get shot.
So you must have just the most insane barometer or compass for bullshit. Anyone I know. I mean, to be able to sense what's that like to be able to sense a real relationship? What kind of things do you look for in those situations versus kind of raising the red flag and getting a little bit on edge about it?
So I've never been involved in the green on blues. Some of the guys I've worked with have. There was a pretty big incident right before I got to my team. And most of the green and blues is like, it's a peripheral soldier. It's not that dude you've been talking to every day. It's not your direct counterpart. But that being said, there were some Afghans who like love the Americans, come on in, very apparent. And then there were some where it was very apparent, like they did not trust you, they did not like you. That would put you a little more on guard. Or one particular platoon leader where the outgoing unit would tell you like, yeah, he doesn't like Americans, like keep an eye on this dude, he has he's very impatient, et cetera, et cetera. So you try to look out. And then the intelligence piece is a big but other than that, you just have to navigate it the best you can. And really it comes down to green on blues aside, not speaking about those attacks, but just their preferences. There's random stuff you run into working with host nation forces. Like we had one of my direct counterparts is that Afghan commander on my SF trip. And for whatever reason, he didn't like me. He just did not. He was very like, I would come in the room and he would get very quiet. I don't know why that was, but like my team sergeant noticed it. He was like, so, but he loved my team sergeant. So my team sergeant would started taking these meetings like, oh yeah, Kasper had, something going on at the base, or he had a meeting, and he would start taking these meetings just because that's who the host nation counterpart was comfortable with. And I don't know if a previous team leader gave this guy a bad impression or what the case may be, but yeah, you kind of work around their sensitivities, and it's one of those things where there's no egos on the team. It's just like,
Right.
okay, how do we get the job done?
And are you at that point, are you picking up pieces of Arabic? Are you partially fluent in it, or you're always dealing with a translator to bring the room together?
So I always dealt with a translator. In Army Special Forces, everybody goes through 6 months of language school. So I had Arabic, which is not much use in Afghanistan. My team sergeant had done Pashto, and he'd done extra Pashto training, and he was pretty much fluent. Like he could operate without an interpreter there. I always operated with a terp, and then I mean, pretty much everybody operates with the terp all the time because there's so many cultural things. You can't, no matter
Totally.
how well you know the language, they've got there's some quirks over there. It's very easy to like offend them
Yeah.
if you misspeak.
I took one semester of Arabic in college because I was a language major. I studied Spanish and business, and I took one semester, and it was by and large the most difficult, challenging. It made absolutely no sense. It was like trying to solve a math problem in 4D. Like
Yeah,
I could not figure it out. And then, like you said, I mean, even if you master some of like the grammatical things or how to connect thoughts, then it's like, well, what town are you in? How old is the
yeah.
person you're I mean, it's the complexities in it are insane. I do have a question about maybe you can kind of draw like the scope here of what is the difference between if you're just like an enlisted infantry soldier up to like the Green Beret level. What are you doing tactically differently in those situations? So when they bring the Rangers in like yourself, what are you doing differently than your average soldier who's just enlisted? And then what are you not doing that maybe another block is in those situations?
Yeah, so in the infantry world, whether it's Rangers, Airborne infantry, conventional infantry, the jobs are largely the same. So if you're a private, your job is to go where you're told, post up where you're told, and then the privates will do the majority of the shooting. So then you've got your private for a couple of years, you become a team leader. So then you're, instead of an E1 private, you're an E4, maybe an E5, so a specialist or a sergeant, and then you've got 3 privates under your leadership, and you are directing their fire and their efforts, bringing those weapon systems in, right? Because all your specialty weapon systems are pretty much run by the lower enlisted guys. Your machine guns, your belt fed stuff. So then you team leaders who get experience on the team, you might become a staff sergeant, then you become a squad leader, and you've got 2 teams under your purview, right? So the squad leaders communicate with the team leaders are communicating with their privates, and that goes up to platoon sergeant. So platoon sergeant has got, he's got 4 squad leaders reporting to him, and then that platoon sergeant is paired with the platoon leader, who's the lieutenant, right, the officer. And that kind of partnership, that kind of mirrors what special forces is. So special forces team, you've got basically a special forces master sergeant and a captain together. The captain kind of manages up and out anything above the team, and the team sergeant manages down and around everything that occurs in the team. So captain's getting his orders on what the team needs to do from your company commander, your battalion commander, and then he's conferring with the team sergeant, and the team sergeant translates what needs to be done to exactly what everybody on the team is going to do. Same thing that occurs with the infantry platoon leader and platoon sergeant. So it's a really cool partnership. The difference with special forces is, it's a 12-man team if you're lucky, generally closer to 10, and then your guys are generally spread out with the host nation force that you're operating with.
And that's where you were, right? You were in a special forces unit over there.
Yeah, my last few years in the Army were with special forces.
And it's always the same group of guys that you're in there with, or that cycles as well?
Yeah, I only had one. I was on one team. Usually, as a captain, you get one team. You might only be on a team for a year. I was lucky; I got to do over 2 years. So yeah, I was with the same team, and then you do have some personnel changeover where somebody's like, "Hey, he's been on the team for 6, 7 years, and you just got an instructor assignment to go teach the qualification course or whatever." So there was some influx of people over the time I was there. But yeah, by and large, you're with the same people.
And is there any kind of like psychological preparation that you guys do? I mean, other than the natural wear and tear of just being exposed to this over a 15-year career, like when you're in a special forces unit, you guys are engaging almost every day, right? So
Yeah, depending on where you're at. I mean, it might be something where you're out every day and there's not much combat, or it might be something where you go out once a week and it's a barn burner. It just depends on where you're at. Or you might be someplace like Africa where there's the risk of direct combat. That doesn't happen or rarely happens. So it kind of spans the full gamut depending on where you're at.
and how did you do mentally with that? Was that
I love deployments. Like the shitty part is the garrison administrative stuff you have to do. The shitty part is, okay, you're going to work and it's online training or getting medical records squared away for deployment or immunizations for whatever country you're about to go to. That's the least fun part of it. Training is fun. Training's a good time, and then combat's the Super Bowl. It's just that's what made it worthwhile. Like I would have done all the bullshit I put up with from 2001 to 2013 or 14 when I got into SF. Just that 2 years on my team, like pick a deployment, and it was worth it just for that.
so you got to give me some story here. I mean, you seem so enthused about the time that you were actually there, like boots on ground doing stuff. So within the restrictions or confines about like what you can and can't talk about, what's one of the craziest experiences that you had operating that special forces unit? And I feel like from your reaction, you're choosing between 100. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big war story dude. Without talking specifics, I've done a lot of like adrenaline sports stuff, right? Like skydiving, base jumping, some ultra running and stuff like that. And there's cool like adrenaline rushes you can get doing recreational stuff, but there's there's nothing like everybody in the village trying to kill you. And then that's good enough. And then when you're in that situation with like 9 other Americans who you've worked with, trained with, party with, wives know each other, you know each other's families, that are all in it with you continuously, like problem solving, like how are we going to reorient, how are we moving, how are we getting casualties out, how are we doing ammo resupply, over the course of extended periods without sleep, just pushing yourself to the limit with guys you totally trust. uh, it's a really cool experience, and it's just one of those things where it's like a high watermark, and I recognize like very clearly. And I told my battalion commander when they were going to send me for some additional training to screen for like a position where they were grooming me to kind of go up the ranks for like eventual promotion to major and whatnot. And I didn't tell anybody I was getting out of the army for as long as I could. And I knew I was getting out. I knew I was going to write, but I didn't even tell people on my team until the last minute, because that community is very sensitive about people writing memoirs. So I was advised very early on, like, do not ever tell anybody that you write, basically. So I kept it a secret. When I finally, it was one of those things like they were pushing me, they were going to take me off a team to try to groom me. And even if I did it, I would have been taking that position away from somebody who was going to stay in. So I finally had to tell my battalion commander, who's just a god among men, fantastic guy. He, thank God, he's I think in line for a general star soon, as well he should be. And I don't say that lightly, but I got in the room with him and I was like, I will stay in the army as long as you keep me with my team. Like, you can keep me on for 5 more years, I will stay in. And he's like, I'm rotating out, my replacement's coming this time. He's like, I can get you out the door on one more trip. And he did. So, but I knew then at the end, like, you're never gonna match this. And it's one of the reasons I was able to walk away, because I could have stayed in and never, ever had experiences like I did with those guys, unless, I resigned my commission and, tried to stay on a team. But even then, it was like war was winding down and it was time.
Have you ever had a brush with death?
Yeah. I've had some close calls, as has everybody, I worked with. Is not unique, but every once in a while you get the the sniper dials you in, and just the round cracks by where you just makes one ear ring like that close where you can't even know. And then there's times you're up, you're doing your thing from a certain fighting position, and then somebody else comes to see how you're doing. It's like, holy shit, like, look over there, and the wall behind you is just pepper. So yeah, everybody in the military has stuff like that, or the IEDs and stuff. I was lucky to never be blown up. A lot of the guys I was with weren't that lucky, or like, you see the truck in front of you just go up and in a fireball. So yeah, there's stuff like that in combat that everybody, this is not just me, everybody has its experiences. And then there've been a few times in base jumping where it's like, where I was like, I'm going in, and then that parachute malfunction or whatever clears the last second and you smash into the ground. But that's, I don't know, that's why I think that's why you do that shit for the most part. Yeah. Like, there's things you can't encounter in day-to-day life in normal society. And, for people who want to go to those edges, they gravitate to the military, they gravitate to the adrenaline sports, to go get what they're looking for.
I can't imagine a wall right next to me exploding from around that is not fake. I mean, it's just wild to that doesn't derail you, that you can experience that and stay focused, or experience it and laugh at it. And maybe it's because it's commonplace. You're signing up for that. Whereas like, me sitting here in the guest bedroom imagining that happen is insane. But how do you return to regular life after that?
I don't know. For me, it was really hard. I was lucky to have a very supportive wife. One kid when I got out. I've got two now. But I had massive transition issues, and that's when it usually hits guys. Is everybody's fine when they're with the team, and then you get out, and it hurts. And I think from what I've heard, and I had to go through a bunch. I did every type of PTS, post-traumatic stress, like therapy and stuff, because I was lucky. Like, first off, I had a great fucking time in the military. Never have nightmares, never have flashbacks ever, but I would just burst awake at 2 a.m, just full adrenaline, or not be able to go to sleep, period. Just certain times of the day, certain things, you just get fully jacked. And I talked to a therapist about this, and she was like, yes, she's like, the problem is your body basically bottles up and represses all this while you're deploying, while you're with units, right? Because from an evolutionary perspective, if you react poorly, you could die. So your body, your mind will just psychologically repress all this shit. And then when you get out, you're never going to do it again. The human brain just tries to process everything at once. So she's like, the problem with guys who've been to war a bunch is it's bad enough with regular post-traumatic stress where you're in a car accident, or you witnessed a shooting or whatever the case may be, where there might be like one thing that triggers you to that event. She's like, she's like, all you guys coming out of the military and you've been going to gunfights routinely multiple times a year on deployment for year after year after year. She's like, it could be a time of day, a season, like a breeze. Like, it could be a billion different things. You'll never be able to narrow it down, but you're basically having all these triggers, whether you realize it or not. So yeah, I had a bunch of decompressing to do, and then you just end up in that place where I would just being in the street, like you're hoping somebody tries to rob you. You're hoping there's like an active shooter that breaks out. You're hoping that something happens that trigger the adrenaline to put you back in that happy place of just that total like laser like focus. And it never happens because you're living between a Trader Joe's and a Whole Foods. So yeah, that took a lot for me. Transitioning was very difficult for me.
I was talking to our Muay Thai instructor. He used to fight in Bellator, and I was asking him the other day, I'm like, do you ever go back and just spar with your old team? He's been retired for years now, and he's kind of like, at the beginning it was tough because you're not training at the level that you have to be training at to compete with those guys anymore because you've stepped out of it. But that's in you. It's like it's he fought for 19 years. It's more who he is than who he isn't. And so that's all, that fight is always in him. It's always ready. It's always there. And he almost has to dumb it down for the rest of us. I could go as hard as I want training with him, and it's 20% of what he's capable of at all times. If he really wanted to just turn up, he would kill me straight up. The guy with his bare hands would just kill me. It would not be a problem. But he's constantly in this zone of being backed off from that, which he's expressed. He's worked a lot on that. So it sounds like you have too, of how to couple that, how to deal with it over time. Is there a lot in place that you have, when you come back from serving for that long? Is there an incentive besides, your own desire to go and like speak with therapists, stuff like that? Are there programs to kind of exit you out of that type of service and reintegrate you back into like the day-to-day life of a civilian who lives between a Whole Foods and a Trader Joe's?
Yeah, living on the edge here. Yeah, there's a lot of programs in place, but you have to find them, right? There's no, like, when you get out of the Army, they're like, here's a ham sandwich and roadmap, like,
right,
have a good day. And they'll give you like, oh yeah, reach out to this place or that place. There's a lot of different programs, treatments and stuff in place. The issue becomes one, finding what works for you. So I tried a bunch of different stuff that just didn't work or was outright counterproductive. Like therapy did not work for me. And I did like EMDR and cognitive whatever processing,
ayahuasca,
and it was
electroshock.
It was one step short of electroshock, but it was all kind of productive. It just put me into a rage. I get really angry, and I would do it for the 12 weeks or whatever I committed to myself. Like, I'm gonna, gut this down. And some people have huge success doing one thing, and then it might be counterproductive for somebody else, and it becomes trying to find your individual thing. And somebody else starts doing horse therapy or whatever, and it works. You have to really work to find what clicks for you personally. And then I'll say, like, outright, like, I was a best case scenario, frankly. Like, I didn't see a fraction of the combat that the majority of guys I worked with did. So I had a 5-year break prep school, 4 years of West Point, which was its own transitional difficulty, to say the least, and then got back into it for a bit. But there were guys doing that the entire time. And a lot of the guys I worked with, even if they hadn't been in as long as I had, they joined way after 2001 due to age or whatever. I know guys who just seen things like that I can't imagine. Just hearing their stories are incredible. And then I had the advantage of, one, I didn't go through a fraction of what they did. And then two, I had a good support system. My marriage didn't implode, right? I had a great deal of success self-medicating with alcohol. Like, I'm not an angry drunk. I can drink. It's socially acceptable. And I can tone myself down if I get like really amped up randomly. It works for me. Other guys don't have that that luxury. And then also the biggest thing is writing for me is therapy. Like, that's why I got into it. It's therapy. And I was doing a job. I continue to do a job that's like 8 hours a day of self-therapy, you know, whatever dark thoughts I'm having, whatever stuff is going on, like I can put that into the characters, I can inject that into the writing. And it's
Right.
incredibly calming to me. And even with all that, I had a really tough time. So when you hear about like the massive trends of, you know, veteran suicide and all these transition issues, like it's real. And as many programs they are, like guys have to find them and then do trial and error to see what works for them.
It's really sad to me that there's not, I mean, I don't know what the solution would be, but that there's not a better thing in place for that, you know, especially if people go and they give their, or they go and they give their life, and then they come back and there's not a, I mean, hearing you talk about how much work you had to do to find out what worked for you, it seems like there's almost like a flaw there. Like there should be a better system set up to come back into it. It's interesting what you say about writing. My grandfather was in the Navy and he was ejected on like psych leave for this event, and he ended up writing a book about it years later. It took him about 14 years, but it was his writing and that process of refining this manuscript and getting out his, it was kind of like his book was the only thing that he could really open up to and talk to and be honest with, was these papers where he delved into his marriage and his childhood and serving, and then the event that happened and psychologically what occurred to him after that. These are things that, you know, he's not sharing this with my dad, he's not sharing this with my uncle, that there's no way for him to communicate that. So writing became this profound experience that ultimately allowed him to step beyond that much later in his life, but still it was like a cathartic experience for him to be able to do that. And with as many books as you've written, it seems that you know, that seems to lend itself the same way.
Yeah, it's incredibly cathartic, and I should have been able to wear myself out by now. But yeah, I mean, it's a continual process, and I'm not surprised to hear that, because that's kind of the effect it has for me, where you can get everything out, whether you're doing a nonfiction memoir type narrative or you're translating those experiences into fiction. Like, I don't know, that's kind of the holy grail for me.
And so why not go into like contract work if it was something that like you love so much while you were serving and you're over there? Is that an option when you come back, or is that
Yeah,
kind of
it's an option. It's an option a lot of guys take. A lot of guys get into contracting and they're still going to the desert, still doing all that. I wanted to pursue writing. I was ready to step away. I don't think it would have been any better in contracting. And I have friends who are in contracting, and it's not the same. And then from their accounts, and then also like the war was ending. Like, guys, even after I got out, were like, you got out at a great time. Like, we haven't done shit, or we're just doing these rotations where we're training people. But yeah, I don't know. The party was kind of over at that point.
And so did base jumping and ultra running. I mean, are those all ultras behind you? The tags?
Yeah, I think those are 50s and 100s.
So you've
I
done
didn't save all my. Yeah, I did. I've done a few. Yeah, and I just have some random
how, like,
buckles and numbers that survived.
does that fill any kind of void, those type of experiences, like to any capacity?
Not for me. It did a pretty admirable job. So I did most of my distance running, base jumping and skydiving were in that 5-year interim where I got out of the Army, or I was still in the Army, but you're a cadet at West Point, which is like, just think about being in hell. Not in the, oh, it's so hard. I mean, in hell as in you're surrounded by like people trying to out douchebag each other, instructors and cadets. It was absolutely miserable. And if you're prior service in that, you know, I went in with prior service guys. We had the first like group of vets kind of coming through, with my class at the prep school. And we were just like, what the fuck is this? And
So,
the
so
kids
you're
coming out of high
coming,
school.
you're coming back from deployment. You're going to West Point, and then you're conjoined with people that have never served active duty, but they're getting ready to go through schooling to then deploy.
Yeah, so West Point's just college, right? It's a military academy. It's the Army's like official service academy. But yeah, the vast majority, they take very few prior service cadets. It's a special like application you do. So there's a limited number of us at the prep school that were both prior service and combat vets, and it's a different world now. The prep school is way cooler than anything at West Point. Way more laid back. West Point, when I went, we were class of 0.08. You know, that cynicism from the prior service cadets proliferated far and wide in my class. I went up there for a 10-year class reunion. I think as many people as could have possibly gotten out, like had gotten out of the Army. Really? Yeah, so pretty cynical class. And it was just like, it ebbs and flows there, but we were at a point where the seniors, when I was a freshman, were like, we had more fun as freshmen than we are now as seniors because the rules and the bureaucracy have gotten so insane. So yeah, I was trying to fill that hole. Started with distance running, which was helpful. Then I got into skydiving, and yeah, I mean it fills the hole for a time. It's probably like anything else. You could probably substitute heroin or any addictive substance, but yeah, so skydiving, you do it for the first time, and then you do it another 230 times or whatever, and it's this amazing adrenaline rush, it's a blast. And then that 231st skydive, you land under parachute and you wait for that adrenaline to hit and that surge of endorphins, and nothing fucking happens. So that's when I transitioned into base jumping. And then it was the same thing. That really did fill a void. You know, it's highly illegal most places in America, so you have to get in with a crew of people where like somebody vouches for you for them to even meet with you type thing. And then they start showing you the local objects and the buildings in New York City and the antenna out here and the cliff out here. And yeah, the adrenaline from that's like, if skydiving was that, I'm not a drug user, but the metaphor I think applies. If skydiving is cocaine, that's like, oh, it's, you know, we're at a party and we're having a blast and we're so engaged. Like base jumping is like the heroin. Like it's a dark world, you know, when you're like sneaking in and out, like picking locks, running from cops. At least the way it happens most in a lot of places in America, it's vilified and it's illegal. Yeah, and then it's just so highly technical. In the margin between dying and having a good jump is fractions of a second in some cases. So that definitely filled the void. That kept me like going for a while. But then you hit the point where like, oh, that 300-foot free fall, the big ground rush doesn't feel intense anymore. Now I'm going to start free falling from 250 feet. No, going down. Okay, so now I'm going to free fall from 230 feet routinely. Okay, now I'm going to free fall from 230 feet, and I'm going to wait that extra instead of it going through. I'm going to wait that extra second before I pitch my pilot chute. So that was the trend. There's plenty of super professional, super awesome base jumpers out there. For me, it was always like, I didn't have a healthy relationship with it. It was about, you know, trying to push that edge. So
I had trained this, he was a wingsuiter. I trained him for about 4 years. I was a personal trainer, and he would come in and I just didn't realize how tight knit and small that you had just alluded to it with like the kind of invite only mentality, but he was a skydive instructor and then he was a base jumper. And when he would talk about base jumping, it's like a small group of people globally where like, and then you confine it to California. There's like 10 guys that do it. And then the wingsuiting was this whole other thing. He would fly to Switzerland and he'd come back with like, you know, you see the videos. And we hit this stint one time that was about a 6-month period, and he had 6 very, very close friends die. And it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when he would talk about the jumps that they were doing, and it just seemed exactly like what you said. It's 300 feet, then it's 250. You know, the keyhole's this big, then it's this big, and then it's like this, and only one person ever has flown through it. You make an error that's, you know, half an inch to the right or left, or a wind gust, a bird, you know, a million different things. And it was almost, when he left, it was almost like giving up a drug, like witnessing firsthand relationship with this person I knew very well, withdrawals, uh, like a longing to get back to that. Also, the realization that there's no adrenaline replication of that you'll ever experience. And it was really interesting watching him go through that, because it was almost a change of personality. And it was everything that you just said. That tight-knit group of people, it was getting to be in it for the wrong reasons, kind of thing. And it was a push for the adrenaline and that closeness, and seeing how close can I really get to dying without dying. And when you're playing that game, how many dice rolls do you get,
Yeah, very true.
So then you go to ultra from that.
No, I kept doing ultras while I was base jumping. It kind of hits a point where once you build up that residual endurance, you can sustain it, and keep doing longer races, like build up right before them. But I started out actually in the prep school. Me and another guy did like 5 marathons as a train up for a 50 miler. And then I kept doing 50 milers, and then did 100 my senior year, and then did another 100 like 3 months later, because at that point you're like, you've built up this base of endurance. Yeah. And then I just did one more right when I came back from the year-long trip to Afghanistan. I did a 24-hour race where it's like a 1.5 mile loop, and then you get 24 hours to clock as much as you can,
like an AMRAP almost.
Yeah, exactly. Non-stop. An AMRAP.
Wow.
So I did another 100 there, and that was my last one, because then I was applying for like the special forces assessment and everything. And if you're an officer, you get like one shot, because the officer timeline's so rigid. Like you get to go to selection once, and if you get injured during your window, you're done. And that was a dream I had for since high school. I wanted to be like a Green Beret team leader. So I stopped running completely then. I stopped skydiving because of that, actually.
What is the difference between like the SEALs and the Green Berets? Because they're tactically similarly elite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is an operational difference between the two?
SEALs are maritime focused, which requires a whole specialized skill set. So all the diving, they do the SEAL delivery vehicles, like these little mini subs, and they're the only ones who do that. So like Army Special Forces, Green Berets, their bread and butter is training host nation forces and leading them into combat, or as well as unconventional warfare, like going into a country with a few teams and building up the resistance and overthrowing the government, which is, like think Afghanistan 01, those guys on horseback, like that's a bread and butter SF mission that rarely happens, but that's what they train you for. The whole Q course, the qualification course, is geared to this massive culmination exercise called Robin Sage, where they have like hundreds of role players, and you infiltrate a fictional country, Pineland, in North Carolina. It takes place across like 10 counties. You're in student ODAs, student detachments. And it's some of the most incredible training anywhere in the military, hands down. So, but they train you for that because that's the pointy edge of operation, right? Yeah. And if you can even do that in training, you're well prepared for what SF is typically doing, which is operating in often politically nebulous environments where you might be helping the government fight a foreign threat, you might be helping the government fight an internal threat, or you might, like, there have been multiple teams in Africa like woken up one day and there goes their partner force overthrowing the government because they've staged a coup. Like, so you're operating kind of politically fluid situations. Tactically, yes, SEALs and Green Berets will have very similar training in terms of the ability to do direct action missions, just doing raids, or getting into places doing reconnaissance. There's overlap there. The SEALs, what makes them unique is the maritime focus. Like special forces, they've got each special forces company, out of every 6 teams, 1 team is like a scuba team, right? But when a real world like scuba mission comes, like it's the SEALs going because they do that 24/7. Like that's their thing. And then SEAL Team 6 is its own thing, right? That's like Army Delta Force, you know, and they were both tier 1. But the SEALs have the maritime focus that requires so much training time and specialization to maintain that skill set.
That's fascinating that there's a role play situation with that many players in it, and to test, be able to
it's wild.
test, like and so you went through this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
that's the last thing you'll do in the qualification course. And like after that, you get your Green Beret, you're going to a team.
Oh, Siri. So how does, when you're going through that, how many days does that take? If you said it's across multiple counties,
Yeah,
that's like a big endeavor.
Yeah, I think you spend 2 weeks in the train up for it.
Wow.
And this is after everybody's gone and done their individual training, because you've got the captains have their own course, the detachment leader course. Then you've got your weapons sergeants, communications specialists, your engineering demo guys that can build and blow shit up, and your medics. Those are all specialties within like a Green Beret team. So you kind of start together. You all do like your own version of Ranger School, small unit tactics, which is actually better than Ranger School in my experience, way better. And then you do like the survival training, and then you guys you all split up and do your individual job training for like 6-8 months. The medics have it longer, and then you come together at the end of that, and they split you up into student teams where all the specialties are represented, and you pretty much 2 weeks of really intensive planning and some specialized training for that exercise, and then you like do your infiltration into this fictional country. And that's, I think it's 2 weeks in the field running and essentially running an insurgency.
And is that like not live fire, but basically everything short?
Yeah, I'm probably the same way now. It's all blanks.
Yeah.
Because if you know, for any live fire stuff, you can't merge in and out of the population.
Right.
Whereas we're, legally, they run into issues there. So you're doing blanks, but it's so immersive, and really was just absolutely incredible training.
What a wild experience. That's, I mean, all of this is brand new to me. I find that fascinating. I love just, physical training in any capacity, but I would imagine that that's got to feel just shy of being deployed, like very, very real. Plus the stakes are high, right? Because you're up for promotion essentially. So you fuck this up and that's kind of it, right?
Yeah. And the instructors out there, I think that was probably, the combat aside, that was probably the experience that like taught me the most equipped me to be an author. That in the detachment leader course I did before that, the training situations they throw you in are so insane and so intricate, and backed by so many role players that it kind of redefined my idea, like what's possible coming from as an infantry guy into that. Now when I plot books, like I just feel I've got just such a storehouse of like what's possible, how things can go wrong, how quickly they can go wrong, how bad things can escalate, how fast, and then all the curveballs they throw at you is really good preparation, to be honest with you.
Well, and that's a great a great segue to talk about the book. So you've written 15 books, correct?
I think so. Yeah, probably about that. I'm probably working on my 15th now.
Remarkable. One is a massive accomplishment aside from your laundry list of accolades that preceded this. When you came back,
assuming the books are good.
right. You self-published your first book.
Yeah, I self-published actually for a while, for a few years. My first 2 years, I was just doing it all myself with a lot of help from other authors that understood how to do things like advertise and market.
So what was that like, the difference between Maybe you can talk a little bit about your first book that you self-published and kind of getting that out there and spreading the word that you're now an author and you're producing literature, and then what it was like to end up partnering with a publishing house and the changes that you experienced kind of through that process.
Yeah, so I kind of had a unique experience in that I self-published my first book like the day I got out of the Army, and I was like, yeah, it's gonna sell. The story's great, right? And then remarkably, I did sell some books without doing anything. Now, this is before, for all the authors listening, this is before Amazon advertising took over, and now, I mean, organic visibility is more or less a punchline, but at the time, like, readers would just find your book. So I published my first book, and then I just wrote the second. It took me like 7-8 months to do the second. And then by then I'd been out of the Army for a year. And my wife was like, I told you, like, I forced you to spend 6 months doing nothing else. Kind of, they just work on your author career. She's like, it's been a year. Like, maybe you should get a job. And so I went into panic mode and did what I should have done in the first place, and actually, like, asked for fucking help, instead of just going into an entirely new industry and assuming it would all work out perfectly. So I reached out to a bunch of thriller authors that I saw on Amazon, and one of them, a guy named Andrew Watts, a very well-known author. I was like, okay, I looked at his bio. He's like, this guy's all over the bestseller charts. He's, Naval Academy grad, cool. And I sent him an email. I was like, hey man, I think the subject line was like author SOS. And I was like, I'm in this situation. Like, what do I do? And he called me and he's like, hey man, like, I've looked at your books. Like, the reviews are great. You're not selling anything. Like, I can tell by the ranking, like, you're not selling anything. So he's like, break down for me, like, what are you doing for your advertising? What are your bids on this type of ad versus this type of ad versus this type of ad? What kind of marketing are you doing? And I was like, I don't do any of that. Like, I write, period. And he's like, holy shit, take this course, like, start running Amazon ads, start your bids at this, do this, change your covers to conventional thriller covers with a shadowy figure holding a gun facing away. And I did everything he told me to do. And then got linked with some other thriller authors and did like cross promotions and stuff, and it all worked. And then books started selling and I started doing okay. And then I limped along as an indie author. I say that because it was so math heavy. My math skills are like 3rd grade level. But you have to run like Excel sheets to track your return on spend for ads. And then, every day you wake up and one ad that was making your bankroll is now just died for no reason. It's just crazy. Anybody who's done Amazon ads probably
I feel you on this on such a personal level for a different business.
Just
but
brutal.
It's so gnarly, especially when it's not your wheelhouse. Like, you have skills and you have proficiencies, and then you kind of know that the thing standing between where you are and the success of your passion is this horrible speed bump of digital advertising and record keeping and accounting. And the problem is that when you're an entrepreneur in the beginning stages, whether it's an author or with a business, it's all on you to figure that shit out, because it doesn't justify really the cost of, I'm not going to go out and hire like a marketing agency for $15,000 a month to do $40 Instagram ads. Like, it's such a mind fuck, but you don't want to give up because you love what you're doing. So it's like, shit. But continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's doubly frustrating because there's no bearing on like the quality of your work, your actual work, right? Like, this has nothing to do with how good your book is.
Yep.
So anyway, I did everything he told me. I limped along as an indie author because I had to constantly harangue this guy, like, hey, what's going on now? How do I fix these ads? Like, oh, now they have new types of ads. The bids are low. You got to get in now. So I went back and forth with that, and I survived. But I survived because of the benevolence of other authors, like, telling me what to do. A lot of the indie authors are successful long term. They got in early, and then they continued to adapt with every change in the industry. And they all have, and I love them. I'm friends with a bunch of them. We get together once a year, but it's like they've all got like marketing experience, accounting experience. They did stuff. They did website construction and search engine
Right.
optimization in their former careers that translate directly to this. And I was like, I know how to jump out of a plane.
Right.
Like, that doesn't, nobody cares. And then anyway, one day I kind of had an epiphany, and I was just like, dude, I don't want to spend half my time doing this shit anymore. Like, I got to the point where I could write longer, plot better, make more intricate stories. And I was like, I've just got to free myself up, because at this point it's becoming a hindrance. Like 10 years from now,
Totally.
I am not, my potential is capped by this time suck. And I was lucky because by then, Andrew Watts, that guy that helped me, had started his own publishing company. And oh yeah, he was military, but he had 4 years at like Procter and Gamble and gotten the best marketing training anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So he had that relevant experience. So he started his own publishing company. And one day I called him, I was like, dude, I will give you my entire backlist and every book I write. Like, I just want to write all the time. It's capping me. So I signed on with Severn River Publishing.
That's Andrew Watts's publishing house.
Yep. Yeah, he started it actually with a bunch of vets, and I've been running with that ever since. And it's so much better for, mental and emotional health, because I'm just able to do.
It can get really debilitating when you're trying to solve this problem that you recognize is not your wheelhouse. And then it's taking, like you said, it draws time away from what could be spent producing.
Yeah.
And then it's frustrating too, because I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I know as a type A person who loves, like, set a goal, I'll fucking find a way to do it. How high do I have to go? How far do I have to run? Like, I can conceptualize that very easily. If I know that something has to be accomplished at a future date and there's somewhat of a plan to get there, I'll just execute the plan, no problem. But when your thing is over here, you know that you have to do it, but there's nothing in between. I end up with all this pent up energy and fuel to like do. And then I'm stuck in my tracks. And that is a really hard thing to deal with, because then I get like almost like frustrated or down, because I feel like I'm not performing at my best in the thing that I don't know how to do in the first place. And the amount of time that it takes to, if you wanted to master like digital advertising, and people go, one, they go to school for it. Two, they have illustrious careers for 10, 15 years where they master the thing. And we're trying to do a crash course in 10 days so that you can get a book launch or a product launch.
Yep.
It's hard to get through that stage. So you partner with these guys, and what was it like after that point?
Fucking heaven. That's where I'm at now. Is I pretty much, like, I have my book production timeline. I tell them, like, this is my expected date to submit these manuscripts. And I had the advantage where I kind of came in with a built-in readership. So they're like, just write, man. Like, it's not like, okay, this is what we need you to put down for a new series and make it this kind of book. I'm able to just I'm just doing what I was doing anyway. Because I had the readership at that point, which was not easy to find, but I found enough readers, fortunately found me, that like my style of writing, which is not for everybody, admittedly, that, they knew, like, okay, there's a foundation of readers already. So I just kind of get to go.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I'll tell the story because the reader or the listeners don't know, but so I was laying in bed and I was reading Atlas Shrugged on my,
like you do.
Yeah, like I do. My fiance and I found this hack for everyone listening, that if you get a local library card, you can rent a book on your Kindle from the library, and then you turn your Bluetooth off and it can't take the book away. So for someone who's like, I'm a slow reader, so she'll crush like 6 books in a week, and I'll read, I mean, Atlas Shrugged will take me probably the whole year. And so I was reading it, and I was loving the book, and I was getting along through it, and I forgot to turn my Bluetooth off. And so I went to read it one night and it was gone, and I was so pissed. And sometimes, I mean, this is stupid, but it can be a pain in the ass to find the next book you want to read if you don't have like a running list. So I was like,
sure,
what the hell am I going to read? And I've been fascinated with military and special forces and everything my whole life. I just always find it very, very interesting. And I always love talking to people who have served or who have written about it, or my grandfather's book that he wrote about his time. And so I will read within the genre a lot of random books. And so I've probably covered, I don't know, 10 different authors or something. And sometimes I'll make it through a couple, sometimes it's just one. And because of that, Amazon, tracks what you read, what you buy. And it said, and I didn't even know this feature was on there, but it was like, hey, with your Prime membership, you get free books. And so I looked through them and I was like, these are bad. Like it was like romance novels and those books with like Fabio's on the front, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Who does this think I am? And then there was your book. And I was like, huh, what's this about? And I looked at the back. I was like, okay, wow, this guy's legit. I was like, read through like all your accolades. And I was like, this should be great. And I stayed up till 3 a.m. that morning. Like I could not put this book down. I read more of your book in one sitting than I'd read. Like, I honestly can't even think back to a time that I crushed that much book. I was not sleeping anymore. Like it got me up and I was like, holy shit, this is wild. And it is a unique writing style. It is a beautiful blend of tactical knowledge. Like, you know what the fuck you're talking about, from the way that the guys hold their weapons to the situations that they come across with different insurgents, to the lay of just like the land. Like, I don't know anything about Syria, but I felt like reading through part of that book, I had a better idea than I did before. So that, coupled with what I talked about earlier, like it's just funny. You drop humor into this really serious situation and you make the characters are very likable. You kind of feel like you're in the truck with them barreling through the desert. And then I was like, shit. And that's what made me reach out in the first place. But it was by complete happenstance on Amazon. So who knows what ad money you pumped in there somewhere along the line, or
You don't want to know.
Andrew, or Andrew did. And
Yep.
so it's interesting when you look backwards and you connect the dots on how things unfold. Here I am reading this book by complete happenstance from ad money that you guys pumped in somewhere in the past that dropped it onto someone's Kindle in the middle of the night. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you found it.
So what's next for you? You're working on your next book now, and that will be through Andrew's published house as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything. I have no plans. I don't want to go back. Yeah, so that series, the book you talk about, The Enemy's My Country, is book 1 of the Shadow Strike series. So I've published book 2 and 3, and then I'm working on book 4 now. So that'll be out later this year. I should have 5 written and released this year. And I plan to take that series out to 10 books. I'm working off a 10-book outline right now. And after that, we'll see if I'm going to continue that or start a new series doing something different.
How much of this is let me maybe rephrase this question a little bit. So my dad was an alcoholic when I was younger, and he's been sober 10 years. CrossFit is his fucking glue. If you took CrossFit away from my dad, I don't know what would happen. I mean, he's 57. So we joke about it all the time that's, like, he gave up one addiction. He found another one that happens to be like wildly impactful on his health and who he is. And we have a relationship now, yada, yada, yada. So how important is writing to you and your mental health and just who you are now as an adult, not being in active duty?
I mean, it's everything for me. Legitimately. So if I won the Powerball tomorrow, my daily routine would not change, like, at all. I would still get up 4:30 in the morning, get that writing time in before anybody's awake, go back to the computer after the kids are at school. I would do the exact same thing, whether I was getting paid for it or whether I needed to be paid for it or not. I'm extremely grateful that I don't have to have like a side hustle or a day job in addition to this, because I would still be right, just come a lot slower. In that, yeah, I think if I took writing away and couldn't do it, I'd be in pretty bad shape. I'm barely holding it together with the books,
Well, it's crazy when I just talking to you, like, you had ultra running in there, skydiving that progressed to base jumping, this wild military career for a long time. And I just find it fascinating that writing is actually the thing that's like enough. Because you think about
Yeah,
like base jumping is an extreme fucking thing to do. Jump off a goddamn building and wait to pull your parachute so that you get a little more adrenaline hit. Like that's insane. And then writing is as old as time. And here is the thing that really like grounds you into being okay with life after service. That's why that just is wild to me.
yeah, and kind of speaking to your point about your father, like CrossFit being like a wildly healthy outlet, writing is very good for that, and that it ages well. Because like all the special operations stuff, eventually you're gonna get broken or you're gonna have to retire. You know, base jumping, the way I was doing it, long enough timeline, wasn't gonna end well. Writing, like you get better at it as you go. You can do it until the day you die of natural causes. And it doesn't get any less rewarding. It gets more fulfilling the longer you go, because you're just like any other skill set. Sure, like powerlifting, I would imagine, not that I have any experience there, but as you break through these boundaries, right, of more complex stories, more complex plots, and then bring a series to a fulfilling end for the reader and starting a new one. It's just, you can push yourself as far as you want to go, and then it becomes, how do you optimize your daily routine? How do you optimize your study of craft to maximize and bring out as much potential onto the page? Yeah, it's great.
How do you structure your? I'm like a freak about routines because I've worked, with myself and then clients on this stuff for years. And I like, my morning routine is so hammered in that when I travel, it like fucks me up because
Yeah.
I get one step away from it and it makes me go crazy. But you said 4:30 in the morning. So like, what's your morning routine, and how much do you think this plays into your abilities as an author or just like as a functioning person in society?
I keep the same routine when I'm home, and I've tweaked it slightly, subtly over the years. And when I find something better, I integrate it. But one of the reasons I really got diehard into a routine, one of my former commanders is like, you need to read this book called Willpower. I forget the author, but anyway, it talks about all these psychological studies that demonstrate how willpower is like physical strength, right? Like you can expend it, you can get fatigued from making too many decisions. So I try to like take all the decisions out of my day and keep it consistent and just put all that energy on the page. So I get up
I
at
like that.
I get up at 4:30 every morning, get a little caffeine. I read for 10 minutes. I write one page of whatever, just handwrite one page, whatever's on my mind. And then I sit down at the computer and go. And that's kind of my golden time, is nobody's awake yet, still dark out. And I can generally get a good amount of work done and set myself up really well for the day. And whenever my kids get up, baby starts crying, like hit the stop button, go take care of the kids, get them off to school, wife goes to work, and then I usually go right back to or actually I go for a run, just 15, 20 minutes, local trail, get some endorphins, get some energy, sit back down, have some coffee, hammer through writing until about 11:30 usually, sometimes noon. And then I do like my workout for the day, get some lunch, usually knock out a little bit of admin, and then I go back to the writing until it's time to like get my kids from school. And
What's
that's
crazy?
rinse and repeat.
Have you ever done any kind of fasting on purpose, not like on accident?
No. I mean, I've done training related fasting, but
I guess
no,
that's what I
not
meant by
ever,
not on
not
accident, but
voluntarily.
right,
Yeah.
right. So there is this, and I mean, maybe this is more placebo than anything, but there's obviously been a lot of research about fasting and the benefits. Dr. David Sinclair has a big thing about it in his book, Lifespan. And there's an interesting thing, like an energy boost that you get from not having food, which sounds really strange. But evolutionarily, I think it makes sense, because if you think back, people waking up not having abundance of food and nutrients nearby, you kind of have to become in a heightened state of alertness to then go out and find it and get it and bring it back to grow your community, whatever. Now I've been waking up at 5 a.m. I did it not because I loved it. I did it because of my client schedule when I was personal training in like the corporate setting. And it just became a habit. And I'm convinced now that like that first hour when you're awake, it's almost like a brain fast. Like no shit's gone on in your life yet. You haven't been hit with like hey, like whatever happens with your kids and your family and the things that they lost and what has to get ready to go to school and this and that. And the dog threw up and like, there's just none of that. It's like a blank canvas that you get in the morning. And I think it's by no accident at all that the most successful people in the world really cherish that first hour. So your brain's on this beautiful, like it just works different. I swear, it's so crazy. And hearing that's that first hour that you just put down, pen to paper, it makes total sense.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for the pre-distraction, pre anybody getting up. You have no outside influences that you don't want, and having total control. And that really helps me get ahead for the day. That's how I wrote, when I had a day job. When I was in the military, I'd have to get up really early to try to get 60, 90 minutes of writing in. So I kind of got into the habit there, and I just keep everything on the rails with that. And then no matter what happens in the day, or guess what, it's a snowflake fell in North Carolina, so they're shutting down the entire state and your kids are home. It's okay because you got that time. You moved the ball forward. Yeah.
Do you ever dream and then dream about like your books, your writing, and then or like ever solve problems in your dreams about writer's blocks that you're having in your story and then take it into your story when you write in the morning?
Yeah, not consciously. I've never had like woken up like, I figured it out in a dream that I remember. What I do all the time is when I'm going to sleep, I think about that scene I'm going to be coming to in the morning, which often is one that I need to figure out something for. Just by nature of it, you write to a certain point, you have to stop for the day. And then you're like, I don't really have a good plan for this next scene. I know roughly what's going to happen. And I just think about that right before I go to bed. And then, usually in the morning when I sit down, I'm like, what should I do? And then it just comes to you. And I'm sure a large part of that is just your brain processing things while you sleep. So yeah, not consciously, but I'm pretty confident that it works well for me.
Do you ever get to, maybe you'll just say no and and that's that. But do you ever throw in like your own therapy and like secrets into your writing that are kind of only for you, but that are like it's not an actual situation that happened to you and your team per se, but do you ever just dump something that like maybe you have never shared, you don't talk about with your family, your colleagues, your friends, your teammates, but that's kind of for you and it just like it's in there and only you get to know that?
Yeah. It's not even subtle. Otherwise this would have been a really awkward question.
Right.
No, it's not even subtle. My first series, so David Rivers, the protagonist you read about, that's the second series with him. My first 6 books were the American Mercenary series. And this guy was a enlisted ranger who did Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq, went to West Point, had a bunch of withdrawal issues, got into base jumping, medicated with alcohol. And it's all there. Like I literally took excerpts from shit I'd written at West Point about, contemplating suicide and being like unhinged levels of depressed, but like very high functioning depressive, and put that, like literally just structured the character off of that. And then it continued. So when I wrote my second book, I was out of the Army, and there's like a line I remember where he's like towards the end of the book, he's telling like, should I get out of this life? Should I continue on this path of vengeance? And there's a line where he's like, it's introspective, and he's like, what does it matter? Like, why would I get out of this? Like, even if I was able to settle down, like the grandest home I could ever attain would become a place, that I'd be wandering through in the dark, the only creature awake, searching for a bottle so I could sleep at last. Like, so it's a line that goes like that, but it's literally something that occurred to me as me and my wife were house hunting. After I got out of the Army, she wanted to move, up to the Raleigh area, and we were looking at homes, and I remember thinking like, oh, like this house, that house. And at one point I had that opinion, like, what does it matter? Like, it doesn't matter where you live. You're still like, you're going to be you're not going to be able to sleep. You're going to be looking for the bottle. And yeah, so it becomes very little translation. Those first 6 books I wrote were that was just literally therapy, like pure and simple. Like it all went straight into there. And then I was going through PTS treatments. And so I have stuff in the later books in that series where, he's like, my memories of coming back from Iraq were, rotting human corpses in the desert being eaten by dogs, juxtaposed with flag waving children and wives, cheering for me on the tarmac. And that was all like straight up, like I would hit a wall and, therapy or whatever, or have some like revelation. I was just like venting it all onto the page. And then I think I got it all out in 6 books for the most part. And then I was able to do like a heist series that has nothing to do with my personal experience and expand. And now it's a lot more subtle in like the Shadow Strike books, because I've just calmed down, like a lot more functional now, a few years removed from the military.
Well, you did a really interesting thing in the book too, that stylistically I thought was a cool risk that you took, which was putting David in the first person sometimes, but like not a lot. I mean, it's kind of here or there. It's not, when it first happened, the first time that you put him in the first person, I thought that would be the pattern of the book, that it would be reflection on the team, first person, reflection on the team, first person, but it wasn't. It was like these very specific moments that you chose to have him that way. And so I was reading the whole thing, I was trying to find out as much as I could about you as I'm reading this book, to see like how much of David Rivers is Jason Kasper. And, I had no idea ultimately, but that's a really strong choice to do. Not a lot of authors, I don't think, choose to do that. And it made me wonder, of these I moments and these reflections, these first person entrances into building situations, conversations with other characters, like how much of that is Jason reflecting on Jason's time, and how much of this is the characterization of David Rivers just kind of going about being who he is. And I walked away from it imagining that maybe it's like a 60-40 or 50-50 or something, and that the fun for you is that we'll never know.
Yeah, I actually, that first series I wrote with David Rivers, the American Mercenary series, it was all first person, which I don't recommend for authors. It's just tough. It's neurosurgery levels of plotting. Like, how do you put that set of eyes seeing everything they need to see to flesh out a story? It's incredibly difficult. I know now. And when I took the series, or when I ended that series, and I was taking that protagonist and the very few surviving cast members from the American Mercenary books, because I killed pretty much everyone.
Great guy.
I took them forward into the Shadow Strike books. So like actually his team in the Shadow Strike books, he almost meets like one of those people every book of the American Mercenary series. But when I took it forward, I was like, how do I maintain like that link to what the readers, like what my readers want and what they enjoy about my writing? And I made the decision to do, David Rivers first person, and then everybody else's point of view is third person. And I wasn't sure how it's going to work out, but most people received it pretty well. So the old people that are used to only first person David Rivers can flow in, and then for new readers, I think it works well. You can just flesh out a story so much better with multiple points of view in different parts of the world or different parts of the battlefield.
Well, and it gives you, I mean, it doesn't sound like you have intentions of stopping writing anytime soon. So it does give you the option too in the future of, I mean, there's Cancer's perspective, there's Worthy's perspective, there's Ian's perspective. Those are all, you've written them all very individual. So they all have their own personality and approach to the situations, right? Like if I took those four, I think it's 5 guys, not 4, right?
5.
5, yeah, 5 including David. If you took each one of those people, the way they think about it, the way they act, the way they approach, the way that they take care of the other, it's all so different. So they're all very different people in and of themselves. And I would imagine that gives you you know, if you hit a serious writer's block, you could do the cancer series or something like that too. So it totally opens doors for you in the future.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of writers do that, spin-off series and whatnot. I don't have any plans for it, but it's good to know it's an option.
Well, Jason, an hour and a half has flown by, as it always seems to do. Let people know kind of where can they find you. This will also be in, you know, in the information, but where can they find you? The name of the books that you can mention, or the next book, and then how can they reach out to you or get involved, newsletters, anything like that?
Yeah, so my website is jason-kasper.com. Kasper. If you misspell it with a C, it'll still route you there. And that's got my mailing list, all my social media links and everything. I'm not extremely active on social media, as you found out when I checked out Instagram and saw I had a 2-week-old message and somebody like, "Hey man, do you want to do the podcast?" But yeah, the website's got all my links, all my books. The book that you read was The Enemies of My Country. It is currently, as of January 2022, it's free on Prime. It's part of an Amazon promotion. But yeah, that'd probably be a good place to start if you're looking for a military thriller from somebody who's rambled for 90 minutes.
Well, Jason, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on here. When the next one comes out, we'll have to do it again. Absolutely. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a blast.